Few would dare to tackle a subject as delicate as the Passion of the Christ with the brutality, fidelity, and courage that Mel Gibson demonstrated. This was not just another film about the life of Jesus. It was an artistic and spiritual call to revisit the most sensitive moment of the Christian faith with visceral intensity. Therefore, it is not surprising that The Passion of the Christ was received with strangeness, fascination, and for some, repulsion. What is surprising is the silence that surrounded the film's backstage. A heavy silence, full of stories, strange episodes, and a type of spiritual charge that those involved say they have never felt in other productions. Mel Gibson knew where he was going. With years of consolidated career, awards, and respect in Hollywood, he decided to follow a path that the entertainment industry avoided at all costs, that of uncompromising faith. He financed the project himself with around $30 million of his own money. That would be enough to attract attention, but what caused the greatest impact was his decision not to compromise on anything. No major studio wanted to support the idea. The brutality of the script, the use of dead languages such as Aramaic and Hebrew, the fidelity to the scriptures. Everything seemed out of tune with what was expected of a successful product. And yet Gibson went all the way. The first bold choice was Jim Caviezel for the role of Jesus, an actor who, at 33 years old, the same age as Christ when he was crucified, bore the same initials, JC. The coincidence became almost symbolic for many, but the truth is that the challenge for Caviezel was far from being a simple performance. In interviews, the actor himself admitted that he felt a spiritual calling. It was not just another role, it was a mission. And he accepted this mission with an open heart, even after being warned by the director himself that the role could cost him his career. And it cost. During filming, unexpected events began to occur. The production did not have the traditional luxuries of Hollywood. Filming took place in Matera, Italy, in difficult-to-access areas, with biting winds, unexpected rain, changeable weather, and an atmosphere that many described as charged. What seemed to be just a shoot soon began to turn into something more. Some would call it a coincidence, others a spiritual manifestation. Caviezel was actually whipped during one scene, causing real injuries. Another time, he was struck by lightning, as was the assistant director on separate occasions. Storms would come out of nowhere, and winds would become violent at critical moments. Cameras would fail without technical explanation. Microphones would turn off by themselves. Part of the structure was knocked down by a sudden gust of wind, which disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. The team, made up of veteran Hollywood professionals, could not explain it. Many remained silent. Others preferred to state it on record. There was something strange there, something that went beyond what was natural. Some saw silhouettes, figures dressed as they had in the past, appearing and disappearing on location. Others said they felt an inexplicable inner peace at specific points on the set, even in the midst of extreme physical discomfort. But it wasn't just the environment that seemed affected. The actors themselves changed. Pedro Sarubí, who played Barabbas, revealed that he felt an uncontrollable compassion when he looked into Caviezel's eyes during a scene. It was as if he was not acting with a colleague, but looking at something beyond. Luca Leonello, the actor who played Judas, was an atheist before filming and sought baptism after finishing the movie. He said that the experience transformed him inside. It changed his outlook on life, death, and the divine. These testimonies began to multiply. The conversations during the breaks stopped being about technique, lighting, or script. They became dialogues about faith, about pain, about what it means to love unconditionally. And even those who did not declare themselves religious began to ask themselves, are we just making a movie, or are we being moved by something bigger? This spiritual weight was palpable, and it exacted a price. Caviezel dislocated his shoulder while filming the scene where he carries the cross, a real heavy wooden cross. The scream you hear in the film is not acting, it is pain, real pain. He also suffered heart problems after filming Wrapped. He needed surgery, but he didn't complain, quite the opposite. In later statements, he said that he considered it a privilege to have gone through all that. He felt that every bruise, every sleepless night, and every tear had a purpose, to honor Christ's sacrifice with truth. In this context, it is not difficult to understand why many still talk about The Passion of the Christ as a film that not only told a story, but activated a collective experience, something that touched the invisible, something that many avoided commenting on for fear of not being taken seriously. After all, in a skeptical and cynical world like Hollywood, who would have the courage to say they saw something they could not explain? But it was precisely this total dedication, physical, emotional, and spiritual, that made the work a watershed. The repercussion that The Passion of the Christ caused even before its release was just a harbinger of what was to come. Major studios rejected the project. Distribution channels turned their backs on it. Critics accused Mel Gibson of manipulating the public, of exaggerating the violence, of having a fundamentalist religious vision. But none of this stopped the silent movement that was growing far from the red carpets of Hollywood. Millions of ordinary people around the world began to prepare to watch what many would later call the most impactful film of all time. Without conventional marketing or grandiose campaigns, the film began to generate a stir based solely on its essence. Entire churches organized caravans. Families gathered in prayer before the screening. Some cried before the first scene. Others left the theater in absolute silence. It was not just a film. It was a painful mirror of humanity, with all its violence, indifference, betrayal, but also its capacity for compassion, sacrifice, and redemptive love. Jesus' silence in the face of pain became deafening to the audience. The scourging, portrayed with raw fidelity, generated physical reactions in the audience. People felt sick. Some had to leave the theater, but not out of gratuitous repulsion. It was because they felt they were watching something that was not entertainment. It was truth, a truth that hurt. Film critics were divided. Some accused the film of being spiritual gore. Others acknowledged, "I've never seen an audience react like that to a work." Many realized that The Passion of the Christ had touched a collective nerve, and the more they tried to ignore it, the more it grew. In Latin countries, in regions of the Middle East, in Europe, in the outskirts of the United States, the film crossed borders and ideological barriers. It was as if it had escaped the control of the industry itself. The press was worried. Why was a film with dialogue in Aramaic, with strong scenes and without the support of major studios, outselling million-dollar productions at the box office? How is it possible that, in the midst of an era of shallow entertainment, a deeply spiritual film was filling theaters and provoking debates everywhere? The answer was only one: authenticity. Gibson didn't sugarcoat the subject. He didn't edit out the faith. He didn't turn the story of Christ into a light-hearted musical or a special effects-filled journey. He went straight to the heart of the pain, and that's exactly what touched people: the heartfelt grief, the radical surrender, the blood-stained gaze of Jesus looking at humanity with love instead of hate, disconcerted even the most skeptical. There was something sacred there, and perhaps that is why the culture industry has retreated, because The Passion of the Christ didn't just tell the story of the crucifixion. It exposed the shame of humanity. It showed how capable we are of killing the righteous, of choosing the thief, of turning our faces away from injustice. It was an uncomfortable reminder of who we are and who we could be. Caviezel, for his part, delved even deeper into his faith after the film. Contrary to what many expected, he did not become a conventional movie star. Instead, he began speaking at Christian communities, universities, and churches, talking about what he experienced behind the scenes of the film. Not as an actor, but as a man who was confronted with something bigger than himself. He said that after being struck by lightning, he felt no fear, he felt peace. That each sleepless night, each physical pain, each wound on his skin made him understand a little more about what sacrificial love really means. He said that after the crucifixion, nothing seemed urgent anymore, that values changed, that vanity lost ground. Jim Caviezel was never the same again. Mel Gibson, on the other hand, faced the consequences. He suffered cancellations, was accused of intolerance, conservatism, and being outdated. His subsequent projects were sabotaged or ignored. For years, his name was branded in the industry as problematic, but he never regretted it. On the contrary, he declared that he would do it all over again, that this film was the most important of his life, and it was. Because The Passion of the Christ was not just a cinematic event. It was a collective call, a call to reflection, a confrontation between light and shadow, between compassion and brutality, between faith and modern cynicism. Many have tried to silence this call, but it continues to echo. There is a kind of silent pact between great films and their viewers, a pact of entertainment, of distraction, of catharsis. But The Passion of the Christ tore that pact apart. It didn't ask you to just watch. It demanded that you feel, that you enter into the torn flesh, into Mary's eyes as she watched her son being whipped, into the silent screams of the Messiah as he was lifted up on a cross. Mel Gibson's camera wasn't looking for applause. It was looking for the truth. And the truth, in this case, bled. Throughout the process, a question hung in the air. Why so much suffering? Why the brutality? Why show, scene after scene, the body of Jesus being destroyed? The answer lies not merely in historical fidelity, it lies in spiritual intent. Christ's suffering was not symbolic. It was physical, real. The film did not seek to create a fantasy or a theological drama. It sought to bring the viewer face to face with the extent of God's love for a humanity that had rejected him. In every lash, the weight of sin. In every fall beneath the cross, the misery of the human soul. And in every act of forgiveness, the victory of something that transcends human logic and justice. Jim Caviezel has spoken about this on several occasions. He said that while filming the crucifixion, he reached a point where he could no longer act, that the real pain, the exposure to the cold, the dried blood on his body, and the weight of the cross put him in a state of surrender. He stopped pretending. He began to simply live the scene. At one point, with his arms tied to the cross, he looked up to the sky and said a silent prayer. Lord, if there is more of me that needs to die, take it now. It was as if he had stopped being an actor and, for a brief moment, embodied the symbol, as if cinema had stopped being art and had become an altar. This total commitment came at a high price. Many in Hollywood distanced themselves from Caviezel. He came to be seen as too religious, too annoying, too out of touch with the industry's cynical, secular set. He no longer fit in, but he also no longer wanted to fit in. Mel Gibson also paid the price. His reputation as a filmmaker was long overshadowed by the controversies surrounding his beliefs. But no commercial failure, no personal scandal, no criticism could erase the impact of what he created with this film. And it is curious to note how precisely those who were most bothered by the work were the ones who felt its power the most. Because a mediocre film is ignored. A powerful film, not this one. This one is attacked. They try to bury it. They ridicule it, but they do not forget it. And The Passion of the Christ refused to die. Even the market, so cold and calculating, had to admit it. With a modest budget, without major digital effects, popular stars, or accessible language, the film surpassed the $600 million mark at the global box office. It was the highest-grossing film with a restricted age rating at the time. It surpassed blockbusters. It made history, and most importantly, it left its mark. In persecuted communities around the world, the film was watched in secret. In refugee camps, with limited power, makeshift copies were passed from hand to hand. In prisons, where pain and guilt coexist with the hope of redemption, the story of an innocent man crucified touched deep wounds. And in simple homes, around a small TV, entire families knelt after the screening, because something there had touched them in a way no other film had. This universality of the message is not only due to the Christian faith, it is due to human truth, to shared pain, to compassion, to the fact that faced with Jesus' suffering, everyone recognizes themselves. The traitor, the coward, the wronged, the one who denies, the one who runs away, the one who watches and does nothing, but also the one who awakens, the one who changes, the one who begins to love. The Passion of the Christ is a mirror, and what you see in it depends on your soul. Over the years, there has been much talk of a possible sequel. Mel Gibson confirmed that he was working on a sequel, The Resurrection, but he didn't want to make just a conventional sequel. He wanted to explore the spiritual, mystical, almost transcendent impact of the 3 days between Christ's death and return. To him, what happens in that interval is more than a miracle. It's a rupture in reality, an invisible battle between worlds, a silent, cosmic explosion. Jim Caviezel has been confirmed in the role once again, and with him, the commitment to once again give his all. Because, for both of them, this project is not just cinema. It is a mission. It is a calling. The new production is still shrouded in mystery. But one thing is certain, if Mel Gibson returns to the screen with this story, it will not be to soften or adapt faith to market tastes. It will be, once again, to provoke, disturb, expose, and touch what is deepest in the human soul. We live in times when truth is constantly diluted, relativized, transformed into a product. But there are works that resist this. There are voices that do not remain silent. And there are messages that, even when buried 1,000 times, are resurrected. The Passion of the Christ was not made to please. It was made to remind us, so that we never forget the magnitude of the sacrifice, the pain that redeems, the love that cannot be explained, only given. And so that when we look at the cross, we do not see just a symbol, but an invitation, a call to transformation. Perhaps this is Mel Gibson's greatest legacy with this work, to remind a distracted generation that there is something greater, something stronger than hate, more lasting than fame, more powerful than any empire, and that this something has already conquered death once and still lives. If you felt something from this story, if you were touched in some way, if you saw beyond what the screen showed, then share it. Don't let this message die. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like to support this work, and comment below a word or phrase that stayed with you until the end of the video. It could be sacrifice, redemption, or whatever touched you the most. If you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like to help us grow. Comment below a word or phrase that caught your attention and show that you stayed until the end of the video.